President Trump at his rollout of the Trump accounts yesterday with Michael Dell and Michael Dell's wife and others in tow was, of course, asked about other issues when it came to the opportunity for the D.C. press corps to posit questions. And against the backdrop of the IRGC firing missiles at two commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz early yesterday, of course, the question of the state of negotiations with the Iranians was raised. Prospect of tolling the strait, which they continue to promote as something they're going to do. One of the commercial ships was a Qatari ship, I read. Trump had this to say about said Iranians.
Up the blockade because we're close to maybe making a deal. I don't know. We'll make either. Look, we're going to win one way or the other. We're either going to make a deal or we're going to finish the job, okay? And it won't be tough to finish the job. I'd rather make a deal because I don't want to affect 91 million people. We can knock down their bridges in 1 hour. We can knock out their energy supply, all of those big plants that they built, big, beautiful, modern plants. They had a lot of money. They don't have any money now. We haven't given them any money. But we can knock out their electricity and power generating plants in, I would say, a small part of an afternoon. Every plant will be gone. And they know that. They know that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the definition of finish the deal even is at this juncture. Does that include opening the strait or ensuring the strait stays open and does not include tolling? In addition to that, you have not just the prospect of tolling, but the prospect that there'll be special considerations given to favored countries. Speaking in Beijing on Saturday, Iran's ambassador to China said his regime will definitely charge service fees to transit the strait, but that China and other Iranian friends may receive, quote-unquote, special considerations regarding the level and type of fee, and thus indicating Iranian foreign policy will be a determining factor for global energy flows, which is something that the Trump administration has rightly said is a deal breaker, is non-negotiable. William Thibeau is a veteran of the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. He's currently the director of the American Military Project at the Claremont Institute. He joins us now. William Thibeau, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Do we have William?
Yep. Morning, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you. So what's your read, against the backdrop of the Khamenei funeral and all the saber rattling emanating from Tehran and then these missile strikes yesterday again in the Strait? What's your read on the state of play?
It's not necessarily a surprise that there's this, disruptive nature to the 60-day MOU period. I think the Khamenei funeral is a time where you're going to see tension, right? It's this emotional flashpoint for Iran. And it's also a time when U.S. and Iranian negotiators are not in contact. So it's not necessarily a surprise. It's not a surprise throughout this entire period that there are going to be disruptions to the framework. But I do think you kind of have to trust the general momentum of the U.S.-Iran war and what longer-term peace could look like. A big difference from before 2026 is that the United States has a credible military threat, a military deterrent on the table that Iran well knows that we are able to use. Think whatever you want about the war, that is a reality. That means President Trump isn't just spouting rhetoric. He's able to put a coin on the table with diplomacy and peace on one hand, but military action that is ready to go on the other side of the coin. And that's real, and that's something most American presidents haven't operated with.
The Iranians also over the weekend trolling Gulf states like the Saudis, scolding the Turks for their neutrality during the war. The Iranians definitely feeling their oats right now. No?
For sure. Yeah. And I do think, though, this is another kind of unique dynamic to this phase of the war with Iran, during the Trump administration, is that the Gulf states are much more participatory, obviously in the war on the giving and receiving end, but also in negotiations. Vice President Vance himself noted that it was a big difference from the Obama era JCPOA negotiations. JCPOA was very much a Europe-centric deal with European verification, European stakeholders to somehow get Iran to comply. And this time around, we're using the GCC, our allies like UAE and Saudi Arabia, and then countries that some would say are closer to Iran, like Qatar, to bring Iran to the negotiating table, but then also bring Iran into the fold of, adult rules for regional and global cooperation. So I think Iran is positioning, and like you said, they're trolling. But there's a deeper meaning underneath here that these countries are a much bigger part of the discussions in 2026 than they were in 2014 and 2015, and that's a good thing.
I mean, I take your point that there's a desire for a closer relationship with countries like Qatar as a hedge against the Iranians. But, there's an ally of convenience, and then there's a relationship that gets too close to one's detriment. I mean, to our detriment. That's the one I'm concerned about. And the Qataris and the Pakistanis being mediators, some business relationships with the Qataris that are questionable. They're taking the new Air Force One from them. I mean, FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracy, had this wonderful report a couple weeks ago about all the Qatari money flowing into various American institutions and whether that is a pause or should be a pause for concern. So, there's close for a very specific purpose or for, like regional stability. And then there's getting a little too chummy with somebody that will stick it in your back as soon as you turn as needed. And I wonder if we're getting too close to the benefit of the Iranians with some of these Gulf state actors that like to play both sides against the middle.
I hear your concern, Dan. I think it's reasonable, especially when you think about the amount of money that Qatar's thrown into America. What I'll say, though, is that, I think that we would have already seen some of this bear out. The Air Force One gift was delivered well in advance of Operation Epic Fury, which, Qatar, if I think the most kind of extreme kind of concerns around this relationship are true, they would have done anything to stop. But, we were willing to do, President Trump was willing to do what he saw to be in the best interest of America, to, punch Iran in the face and severely degrade their military capability starting on February 28th. And I think the world, especially the Middle East, is a complicated place, and we're not always going to have partnerships and alliances with countries who are, 100% aligned with American values and our interests. But to what extent can we stitch together a coalition to, move forward, move past what has been 3 decades of kind of chaos and war in the Middle East, so we can focus on implementing the national security strategy, defending our homeland, dominance in the Western Hemisphere to the north and the south, and then countering China and the Pacific, which I think are much more proximate and much more existential threats than what the United States faces in the Middle East. We can keep Qatar at arm's length, I think, acknowledge the underlying ways in which they're trying to influence the United States, but see that there are going to be ways that our relationship with them is good and ways that we won't be able to trust them. And it's worth being clear-eyed about, instead of, again, to contrast it with, I think, the establishment neoliberal ideology, to instead of trying to have this faith-like approach to foreign policy that is divorced from U.S. interests. That's, I think, the chance we have to, embrace something different with the Trump administration.
I agree. I mean, it's a balancing act. There's no question. I just make sure everybody's clear-eyed about who we're dealing with. We don't get too chummy and make missteps with people. Well, I mean, they're Islamic theocrats, most of them. So, we're not starting from the same premises, which is sort of a key point. And look, Abraham Accords, for example, that's like great asymmetric approach to the Middle East and trying to generate more stability in the region. I agree. But then there's things like the prospect of selling F-35s to the Turks that I think now we're getting too chummy. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. I mean, obviously, Israel does not want us to sell F-35s to the Turks. I will say though that Turkey is a NATO ally, and I don't say that as kind of some fealty to our NATO alliances. But I think we have to understand that if NATO is going to succeed, if we're going to be able to have relationships in the Middle East and Europe that kind of underlie the stability of the Western order that the United States bankrolls, then I think some of these kinds of weapons deals might be necessary. We have very significant assets, military assets in Turkey, in Incirlik Air Base, with very, very legitimate capabilities, being one of them. And I think, we have to understand that if we're going to sell Turkey F-35s, there has to be some real concessions from them when it comes to the source of stability that they can be to the north in the Middle East, how they can be a check on migration from the Middle East into Europe. And then, of course, them cooperating with Israel, finding a new path forward. There's already saber rattling between Turkey and Israel. I think it would be a disaster for those two countries to go to war together. We'd obviously be in a really tough position there.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer. I don't think it's as easy as say, we must not sell Turkey F-35s because they are integrated into the Middle East and our European security relationships, and they're a legitimate, perhaps the most prominent regional power in the Middle East. So there's value in getting them on our side. But to your point, Dan, we have to make sure that they would be on our side and that they would behave in accordance with America's interests.
Just another topic that's more general, just because there's been some pollution coming from the UN, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, about autonomous weapons. And so this spills into the DC press corps, and there's all sorts of hysterics about autonomous weapons and what the U.S. military is or isn't doing, what path we should go down with autonomous weapons, and particularly, of course, the specter of Trump and how he is viewed in the context of this developing technology. But as you write about recently, and as most people pay attention know, I mean, we've had autonomous weapons capacity for some time. This is not new, and we're not behind the times. There are legitimate questions about deployment and tactical use, but I just wanted to give you sort of the opportunity as the expert here to provide some context to where things actually are in terms of the functional use of autonomous weapon systems and what the conversations are like when it comes to the ethical use of said weapon systems.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Dan, and the opportunity. But my thesis up front with kind of some of this consternation from bodies like the UN is that it's just meant to kind of throw sand in the gears of responsible but aggressive technology development from the United States. There's so much consternation dedicated to, visions of how, the United States uses autonomous weapons on the battlefield. And what I write about for the American Mind recently is to say that the framework for the use of such weapons already exists. The United States does not act the same in war, based on if we are, in a contested, declared battlefield versus operating in a city where populations between combatants and non-combatants are mixed. And we adjust, I say we because I used to be in the Army, but, the Army adjusts the rules of engagement appropriately so that the United States can still win on the battlefield, but then protect innocent life and ensure minimal damage to civilian infrastructure. Those same categories can still apply to autonomous weapons. To speak to the technology, we're not quite at the level of tech advancement where autonomous drone swarms move through the battlefield uncontested. There's still probably 12 to 18 months of iteration and development that needs to take place before that's really possible. But it's coming, and it's going to be here soon. And I think when it comes, it will largely define warfare in new ways. But again, we don't. The American military, especially the American government, is the most, I think, ethical administrator of force in the world, and we would treat the Taiwan Strait differently than we do downtown Tehran, even if we're using autonomous weapon systems. And I think that can help a lot of people rest easy, knowing that the technology can be developed in such a context where it's not going to get out of hand.
And so, so much of the talk about, Ukraine and what's happening in Eastern Europe is teaching the U.S. that we need to, be more nimble, and we need to understand and use drones the way that the Ukrainians are using them. They're cheaper and they're effective to hold off the Red Army. So we should be using them. And it's the seeming implication is that we're somehow behind the times, or this is news to the U.S. military, but that's not true.
No, it's not. And Ukraine and Russia offer really valuable lessons for the United States. I do think we need to build out a capacity of cheaper, what we call more attritable weapons that can be deployed faster and used faster and expended. But that war is not how America would fight a war. It's a stale slaughterhouse, candidly. And I know, and thankfully know that the United States would never operate that way. So we can't just kind of port over the technology that's being built in Ukraine and Russia and, give it to the United States military in a one-for-one swap, because that would not work. We still need some sophisticated weapons. We still need, maneuver formations that can seize terrain quickly and then press the momentum against an enemy force. And that'll kind of have some more unique applications for the kinds of drones and counter-UAS systems that we buy. But there are still valuable lessons learned. And obviously, let's hope that we don't ever fight a war like Ukraine or Russia are doing right now.
Yeah, and lessons learned about how to deal with the nuisance of drones, even when it comes to commercial waterways like we're dealing with in the Strait of Hormuz right now.
That's right. No, well, I mean, that's right. The lesson is true that, a $10,000 jet ski could destroy a $100 million warship. And that poses a whole host of questions for freedom of navigation, like to your point, how are we securing commercial ports these days when infiltrating them is now so much easier with, say, cheap 8-foot submarines. So it is really a new era. One thing I've written about is that it really does lower the bar for participation in conflict. Ukraine is able to hold, at least for now, hold the massive Russian military apparatus at bay because they have this asymmetric ability to compete on the modern battlefield with cheap attritable systems that have an outsized impact against the enemy. You could say that Iran, not to the degree, but that is something that Iran has in their favor going forward. Obviously, the United States military has overmatch and dominance But Iran still possesses the ability to inflict pain on the Strait of Hormuz, on our Gulf allies, and even on U.S. military infrastructure to a degree that I think gives us pause or would make the consideration to restart any military operations a serious one. And this, again, I think is a new phase of war. What if in the 21st century war is not as effective of a means of political outcomes as it was in the 20th century? Not that it was a simple, easy path of the 20th century, of course. But the point is I think more smaller state actors, even non-state actors, will be able to let's say participate in the battlefield of modern warfare, and that I think poses a bunch of interesting questions for foreign policy going forward.
William Thibeau is a veteran of the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. He's currently the director of the American Military Project at the Claremont Institute. William Thibeau, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, thank you. Take care.
Take care. And you join us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Chicagoland certified financial planning professional Tim